Hey there, and welcome back to Garage Time. Today's project is going to be a kind of a simple one. I'm going to try to redo some of the fuel lines in the engine bay to kind of tidy it up and make it more maintainable. Currently, I'm running some rubber flex lines all the way from where it attaches to the engine over to the tunnel. And those in the last 2 or 3 years have already gotten pretty hard and brittle. So where I live in California, we got to change our fuel hoses quite often. So I'm going to go with some metal lines to sort of minimize the amount of rubber in the car so that the fuel can't really attack it. The metal fuel lines are fine here in California. Ultimately, I want to go with the Teflon sleeved fuel hose that lasts pretty much indefinitely here in California. But that hose is very expensive, so that's the reason for going with a metal hard line as much as possible. So it's starting to get a little crowded here in this corner with the new wire harness installed. That's also where the fuel lines pop through from underneath the car. So I want to try to make it look a little bit more put together and factory. So I think I'm going to make a bracket that'll support the fuel lines so it'll be easy to connect and disconnect that. There are 2 fuel lines, the supply and return. The supply attaches to the engine kind of here in the middle, and the return is off to the left. So we could put something, more towards the middle. I also want to keep the back firewall mostly clear. This panel is removable so I can get access to the engine if I need to. And it's also important to be able to put the sound pad in without being obstructed with something mounted to it. So I'd like to be able to have the sound pad easily removed and get access to that panel if I need to. Also, if you're wondering if I'm stalling a little bit on getting the engine put in, and the answer is yes. There is a problem with the engine. It's actively being worked on, and I'll explain a little bit more at the end of the video what's going on. But for right now, I can't install the engine, so it's a good time to kind of do some, tidying up and maintenance on the parts that I do have. So here's the situation under the car. This line here is just kind of a snorkel to prevent all the fuel from running out of the tank. This is the return line. And this one here is the black line that has the supply fuel. It is going directly over to this side where there's a fuel filter here. And then it comes out of the fuel filter into this one. This is another soft line that was running up here where the wire harness is and into the engine. The return line was also coming through here, and it was being connected to this side, just kind of tie wrapped here with these hoses. So I think what I will try to do is to make a hard line, tuck up tight into these loops. These loops are here for either wiring or fuel. That's how the factory did it. And I think we can go right through here. This is just some foam to prevent air from leaking through there. But I think we can go right between there with a little bracket that will allow the fuel lines to be accessible right there from the top. It keeps it away from the heater and it keeps it away from the wiring, so we're not fighting for space. You want to know how to make this baling wire straight? Okay, this black wire is going to be hard to see, but I basically made a template. So it's going to go into that fitting right there, avoid the bell crank for the throttle, and it's going to go upwards quickly, and then it's going to go just adjacent to this hook. Because I don't think the tube ends, the AN tube ends, I don't think it's going to go through there. So I'm going to use that as a clamp, but I'll have to, clamp adjacent to it. So I'm going to go up here into this corner and then under those wires and then up through the firewall. And then this is where it pokes through into the shock turret area. So this will be the connection point to the engine. Actually, I was wrong. These tube nuts will slide through here. Basically, it's a perfect fit. So I'll be able to run the tubing basically through that loop so it has an attachment point. I was able to get the flex line through there, but you have to put the ends on after the fact, which is kind of a hassle to change them now. All right, this is the shape I want to replicate. So it's really got one bend in that direction, 2, 3, 4 bends in total. And then of course we have to flare the ends so that these nuts will work. We're not going to be able to straighten that with a drill, so we're going to need to use the old tube straightener, and this is a little bit of magic. It's always hard to get this first piece in, but I just bend it a little bit. Okay. So we can loosen these up quite a bit. And if you've never used one of these before, it's good to keep the tube rotating as you roll it. That way there you don't create little flat spots in it. And I just do quarter turns each time I run it through. It's pretty typical that the last inch or so is not straightened, so I end up just usually cutting that off and just use the straight section because this stuff's pretty cheap. So this can be flared as is. The steel's pretty easy to work with. Stainless is a little bit tougher. You have to clean up the inside a little bit, but this is clean enough to go ahead and put it right in the flare tool. This is the Eastwood flare tool. It does up to, I think, 1/2 inch. This is 3/8 tubing, so it's got a bunch of dials on here. We just select the right size, and it just puts the right flare in for AN fittings, which is perfect. So that's just real light pressure on that. You can see the tube is sticking out from the die, and operation 1 will kind of just push the tube back into the right location. So once it's right there, I like to clamp the tube into the die and then let go. And now the tube is only sticking out a slight amount. Now we rotate to operation 2, which happens to be just right next to it. And I usually put a little bit of grease on there. There's a little bit left over from last time, but should just be able to pull here and create that flare. And it's, you know, pretty firm. And then release the pressure on this one. Quick release clamp. And there it is, a little bell mouth on it. And someone's going to say, oh, you forgot to put the tube sleeve on. And yes, you can just slide it over on this end, but when you do that end, you have to make sure you put the sleeves on first. This is called the tube sleeve, and it has that 37-degree flare on it right there. And then this is called the tube nut, and the two fit inside of each other, just like so. So when we slide it onto the end, what ends up happening is that this tube sleeve makes a perfect contact to the actual tube. So the actual tube is what makes the connection to the opposing AN fitting. So the formed part of the tube actually seals against the cone here on the fitting. And the nut basically just clamps it all together. The other nice thing is this can swivel on the tube. So once you tighten it, it's just going to clamp it. It doesn't twist the tube or anything like that. It just makes it easy to put wrenches on it as well. We can thank the Army Navy for that. That's where AN comes from. Military technology right here. Okay, now it's time to, produce this shape. And this first bend is very close to the end. So that's why I flared it first, so that I can go ahead and put the bend in right about there. And the way I mark it is I mark the beginning of the bend. So in my case, the beginning of the bend is going to be just about here. And then the radius of the bend is pretty tight. It's fixed by this tool, and it's just a simple tool that just pulls it around. This bend is only about, I'm going to say 15 degrees, but it has to be done very close to the end. So I'm going to do my best to just go to that first line when we bend it. Stop that right there. That'll be about 15 degrees. My zero mark is lined up with these double zeros. So then this comes on top, and this is the tube sleeve right here. Now the tube nut, there's no space for the tube nut, but the tube nut is actually got a thin diameter on it, so it can go around bends, but the tube sleeve has to be there before you bend it. So now it's just a matter of going to that first thing, like I said. And that is roughly 15 degrees, I think. So that comes out of the tool like that. This will no longer slide out of the way, but this guy should still slide on, let's hope. Second bend is a little bit more challenging, so that's where that is. Bend number 2, we know it starts right here where my thumb is. But the issue is we have to know where it bends. So it's not bent straight up, it's bent this way. So what I end up doing is I want to make this vertical. And I'm going to make a mark right here. That mark goes this way. And then I'll make another mark 180 degrees from that one, which is what will be visible in the actual tool. So I'm just going to keep that orientation there, and I'm going to put another one there. I'm just going to eyeball that those are opposite from each other. Yes, they are. And I'm going to transfer this bend kind of all the way around the tube. Transfer this line, I should say. So that's the start of the bend. And this is the orientation, and this has to bend up. So I can put a U on there just to make sure. It kind of looks like a happy face. This will all wipe off when we're done, but it's important to keep your bearings straight when you're bending this tube. So we'll double check it one more time. The reason why the happy face is here is because this is what was up on the table, but I'm gonna push it from down, but it's going to bend it, basically it's gonna bend it up. But this line is the clocking angle. That needs to be straight here with this handle. These lines here, the ones that go around the tube, those are lined up with the 0. So this is ready to go. We're gonna stop at 75. And you need to eat your Wheaties for this. Ugh. Okay, let's stop with that right there, about 75. So see how that's kind of following that. That's going up there. So the next bend begins, once again, right here where my thumb is. So let's make that mark where my thumb is. This is shaped like a Z. So now it's gonna bend it in the right position, the right angle. So one more check there. And this one is a little bit of a larger radius, the way it fit the car, but I can't do the larger radius. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna cheat out just a little bit. I'm gonna cheat it like a 1/4 inch. I'm gonna double check the angle there. And I'm gonna bend this one. When I look at it on the table, this looks like a little bit more than 45 degrees. It's probably like 50, 55. It looks like that needs to be a little bit bigger angle, so I'm gonna put it back in the tool, and I'm gonna cheat it again over just a little bit. About like that. Still a tight radius. It's hard to fake the radius when you only have a single radius tool. But that's now following the shape of my wire just a little bit better. And this one is practically 90. I'd call it 80. Practically the full 90. Yep. Real close to 90. And you can see the tube maintains its shape pretty well. It doesn't crush or anything. It's pretty nice. So let's double check our work. It's pretty close. So we got that bend right there. We got that bend, which is much tighter, and then we have this length here. The tube's a little long. the wire was a little long. So let's put it in the car and adjust it by hand, and then we can crimp the final tube flare on there. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. It's loose, but that is going to replace this tube. That's just temporary. It's going to fit right there to the tunnel fitting, and then it's going, directly up. I know it's going to clear the bell crank on the transmission. That's where this goes. That's going to be like right here. So it turns up quick enough, tucks in between these two clamps, which I can then use hose clamps. This part of the car does not flex at all, so it's okay to secure it down tight, and then it goes up into the engine bay right through there. Then from here, I'm going to trim it down just a little bit shorter. That way there, I can go ahead and put the fitting on it, and then we'll go from here, it'll get a bracket with some welded fittings on it. And then this is the one where you absolutely don't want to forget these parts. And you got to put them on in the right order. So it's this one, and this one goes this way. So that looks correct like that. So now it just needs the flare on the end. So we'll do that real quick, and then this line will be done. See how the cone there is nice and shiny on the inside? That's what you want, because it made good contact with the tooling, so when it makes contact with the fitting, it's going to create a seal. All right, I got the old line out. This is the new one, and that's where it's gonna live. I think I got it clamped into this loop. Like I said, it was too difficult to get it fed through the loop without the ends, running into all this stuff. But I was able to put that clamp on the outside. I may flip it upside down and, push it closer to the car. But for now, that's got it in position. It's going to clear the transmission just fine. I've taken some measurements. The transmission's no wider than this right here. So it's going to come close to it, but it's not going to interfere with the transmission. And then up here, it comes out right about here. And it's a little bit flexible, but I'm going to make a bracket that's going to attach this piece here permanently. So then I can always just wrench on it from inside. This won't be flopping around like that. It's going to be secured to the cross member. And yeah, a little bit of gas dropped out of there when I did that, but it's mostly gone by now. This is my tow rope. In order to hold these unions to the car, I want to weld them to the cross member or make a bracket that's going to support them. So I sketched something, real quick. Basically, these are going to drop in like that. They're going to get welded to the plate, and then I'm going to have some bolts, through bolts, and some spacers. They're going to attach it to that rear cross member. That's going to make it so that you don't need to get wrenches back behind the cross member to take the engine out or take the supply and return lines off. These will be welded essentially to a bracket which is bolted to the car, so you can just spin the nuts off when it comes time to remove the lines. These will likely be flexible lines because the engine vibrates, those have to move. I could use the plasma cutter, but I think I'm just going to go with this little grinder. These are going to be welded a slight angle so they get away from the sound insulation that goes directly behind them. So we want that sound insulation to have some room, but we also want the fuel lines to come through there. And so I think like I don't know, maybe a 10-degree angle is all I need there. the zinc on one side or three sides have been removed. So I'm able to weld this. Okay, I've been working away on this second fuel line. This is actually a supply line, and it comes up through that hole too. So it's a crisscross, but I wanted the supply to be on that side and the return to be on that side, because that's how it is on the engine. So underneath here, we're mostly done. And then up here is that bracket that I just welded, and it's going to mount just like that. And so these two kind of little nipples are going to be sticking up, and that's where I attach my fuel lines to. So it's easier than what the factory provided. The factory provides this one. I think this is the return, through that little grommet, but it's too small. It's not AN, and you can't get the nuts through there. This is the supply. It basically just going to loop over here to where it attaches to the engine. And then the regulator, which is going to be for the return, is going to be up here in this corner. So it'll just be a short connection to the regulator. And that way there's plenty of room for the wires. I'm going to make sure those wires, stay clear of this heater right here. They can't be touching like that. So I'm going to be pulling them up with some extra grommets and stuff, and just basically kind of make it look like this was all intended to be here, instead of just stuff laying over the top of the cross member. I wanted it to be really more purpose built like that. So next step is to screw this down to the cross member. So I'm going to make some round spacers. And originally I was going to use riv nuts here to riv nut into the cross member, but I don't have a right angle riv nut tool. So I may have to borrow one. So for now, I'm just going to put some sheet metal screws down into the cross member, and there's already one hole there. It's kind of like a drain hole or a grommet hole or something like that. So I basically just need to drill one hole and then just screw it down with some spacers. All right, the spacers are in. This spacer might be still a little too long. I haven't checked how level that is, but that is really what I wanted. I wanted to have the supply and return lines just easily accessible there. The way this would work is you remove this bolt and that spacer so you can get the wrenches in there, and you can tighten this one first, tighten that one second, and then the stuff on top is easy. So I tried to make it as functional and easy to use as possible. The only thing I may have done differently is, put a little finished edge on this, which I could still do that with the welder. I could just put a little flange going down, and then the wrenches would still have access underneath there because the wrenches are right there. So that would be the only thing I would change, is just make it more round like this was. And then I'll send this out to get replated, and I'll probably paint it black. I want the yellow to stay yellow, and this will be black. And then the insulation is pretty thick. It's like 1/2 inch. So I can get my fingers down behind here. So that's going to go all the way from this parcel tray all the way down and tucked into here. Some of this stuff will be laying back here, but in general, I think it's going to look nice and tidy. But I wanted to get that done definitely before we put the sound insulation in and before we put the engine in. It just makes it look a little bit better. Supply line for the engine is right here. And this regulator, like I said, is going to get mounted to the car. So this goes away. This is where the fuel goes into the fuel system, and it goes hard line right to this throttle body, and it goes soft line to that throttle body. And the reason for there being a little bit of soft line here is so that when things expand and vibrate, it's not going to be hard on the tubing. The loop here in the flexible line will account for any sort of temperature variations, any kind of vibration in the thing. So these lines will be shortened. That will just be real quick to the regulator. And the regulator has this return line. It's low pressure to the fuel tank. That's the one that connects to the new fitting I just made. That was a fun project. I'm happy with the access now to the fuel lines, and they're basically lower maintenance and higher reliability. So that's a big win. And as for the engine is having some problems with the throttle bodies. And PMO is aware of the problem. They're actively working on it and being responsive and trying to, diagnose it and figure out a better solution as we move forward. but that's going to be a little while. So this project probably isn't going to continue for the next couple weeks, maybe a couple months. So if you don't see Mac in a little while, that's okay. Just know that we're going through and making it better, and probably gonna go back to the 356. So I'm excited to put the interior in the 356. So if you're a 356 fan, that's good news. If you're a Mac fan, it's good news, but it's just gonna take a little while, and I'll share all the details once we get a resolution on this. But just so you know, if you don't see Mac and you don't see this engine in a little while, it has to do with the throttle bodies. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys hopefully next week in a 356. Take care.